Imagine a place where temperatures plunge to -50 degrees Celsius, where it isn't wind blowing, but razor-sharp daggers of ice, where for thousands of miles there is no land, no human life, no living soul. And right there, trapped on a floating sheet of ice, are 28 men, with no radio communication, no GPS, and just 1 month of rations left. Ahead of them lies thousands of miles of toxic freezing ocean, and behind them lies their ambition, their stubbornness, and their slowly sinking ship. Human history is filled with epic tales of survival. Men who spent months lost in jungles or survived high in the mountains after a plane crash. But what unfolded in the white hell of Antarctica in 1914 is a story of human endurance, sheer madness, and unbroken spirit that still sends shivers down your spine today. This is the story of Sir Ernest Shackleton and his 28 brave crew members who looked death in the eye not just once but every single day for 600 days. The date was November 4th, 1914. While the world was plunging into the horrors of World War I, a massive wooden ship named Endurance set sail from a corner of Britain, billowing thick black smoke into the sky. Their target, Antarctica, a continent about which people back then had only heard terrifying legends. Leading this mission was Sir Ernest Shackleton. Shackleton had a single obsession: to achieve what no human in history had ever done before, to cross the continent of Antarctica entirely on foot. Yes, you heard that right. A 2,900-kilometer trek, walking on nothing but ice for 120 days in freezing temperatures of -50 degrees. His plan was to sail through the Weddell Sea, land at Vassel Bay on the coast of Antarctica, trek across the South Pole on foot, and reach the Ross Sea on the other side. On December 5th, 1914, Endurance arrived at a small whaling station on South Georgia Island, the last outpost of human civilization on their path. Local whalers gave Shackleton a stark warning. The ice in the Weddell Sea is extremely thick this year. Do not go forward. It is suicide. But Shackleton was consumed by his goal. He ignored the warnings and pushed the ship forward. And soon, their worst nightmare came true. The moment they entered the Weddell Sea, massive sheets of ice began locking around the ship. On January 18th, 1915, just 60 miles from the mainland, Endurance became completely trapped in a giant sheet of pack ice. They ran the engines at full power, tried hacking away at the ice with chisels and axes, but the 300-ton ship wouldn't budge an inch. Days slowly turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and then came the terrifying Antarctic winter. Winter there means 24 hours of pitch-black darkness. Imagine months without a single ray of sunlight, surrounded only by silence and bone-chilling cold. Trapped inside that giant ice floe, Endurance began drifting further away from the mainland, carried along by the wind and currents. As temperatures dropped even lower, the crushing pressure of the ice began grinding against the wooden hull. Traveling with them was photographer Frank Hurley, who captured those terrifying moments on camera. His photos showed thousands of tons of ice crushing the massive ship like a matchbox. On the evening of October 24th, 1915, a horrifying sound echoed through the air. A massive slab of ice tore through the stern of Endurance, and water came gushing in. For 3 days, the crew operated the pumps continuously, but the flooding was unstoppable. On October 27th, the sound of wooden beams snapping violently filled the night. Shackleton shouted the order, "Abandon ship!" All their supplies, 3 small wooden lifeboats, and 28 men stepped out onto that floating sheet of ice. Within hours, the stern of Endurance rose 20 feet into the air, and it sank forever into the dark, freezing waters of the Antarctic Ocean. As the ship went down, Shackleton's dream of crossing Antarctica sank with it. But a much bigger question arose. Would any of these 28 men ever return home alive? They had no radio communication. The rest of the world assumed Shackleton and his crew were long dead. All they had left was 1 month of food rations, 3 small lifeboats, and a single sledge. Shackleton ordered everyone to strip down to absolute necessities and throw away all personal belongings. Nothing was more valuable than life. Shackleton himself tossed his gold coins and Bible onto the ice. Photographer Frank Hurley had 400 glass plate negatives, but was allowed to keep only 150. Those very photos stand as witnesses to history today. As food supplies began running out, they were forced to shoot their young dogs and puppies, having nothing left to feed them. They set up what they named Ocean Camp on the ice. But the very sheet of ice they were camping on was slowly beginning to melt and crack beneath them. Shackleton calculated that the nearest land was Paulet Island, 550 kilometers away. They began hauling their heavy wooden boats across the ice. But because summer had arrived, the surface of the ice had turned soft and slushy. After 3 hours of backbreaking labor, they looked back only to realize they had covered a single mile. Hauling the boats was impossible. They had no choice but to wait and pray that the drifting ice floe would carry them closer to land. Food became so scarce that the crew was limited to one biscuit, a bit of diluted milk, and canned meat paste per day. They began hunting seals and penguins, eating raw meat to survive. To get drinking water, they tucked chunks of ice inside their clothes, using their own body heat to melt it, yielding just 2 or 3 spoons of water at a time. The weather grew even worse. Slowly, their ice floe fractured until it was only 50 meters wide. Staying on it meant certain death. Shackleton made the call. It was time to launch all 3 small wooden lifeboats into the open sea. Think about it. After 497 days without setting foot on solid land, 28 men ventured into that stormy ocean in tiny, open lifeboats. The air was so brutally cold that sea spray froze instantly upon touching their bodies. In the pitch black of night, an ice floe cracked and crew member Ernie Holness fell into the freezing water. Shackleton pulled him out immediately, but with no way to light a fire, hypothermia was setting in. Shackleton ordered him to keep marching all night long so his own body heat could dry his clothes. Miraculously, the young man kept moving all night and survived. On April 15, 1916, after 7 agonizing days of being battered by brutal ocean waves, a jagged rocky mountain emerged through the mist. Elephant Island. After 497 long days, as their feet touched solid ground, men broke down in tears while others kissed the earth. But their relief was short-lived. Elephant Island was a completely desolate, uninhabited rock where no humans lived and no ships ever passed. One crew member, Blackborough, had developed gangrene in his feet, while another suffered a heart attack. Shackleton knew that if they stayed on Elephant Island, all 28 of them would slowly freeze and starve to death. They needed help. But the nearest whaling station was on South Georgia Island, over 1,300 kilometers away. Standing between them was Drake's Passage, the most terrifying body of water on Earth, infamous for towering 40-foot waves. Over 20,000 sailors and 800 ships have been swallowed by Drake's Passage throughout history. Crossing it in an open 20-foot wooden boat was a guaranteed suicide mission. But Shackleton had no choice. He made the decision to leave 22 men behind on Elephant Island under the command of Frank Wild. The stranded crew overturned 2 lifeboats to fashion a makeshift shelter. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton and 5 of his strongest men set out into that deadly ocean aboard a tiny 20-foot boat named the James Caird. Those 3 weeks were nothing short of hell. 20 hours of darkness each day, freezing waves threatening to capsize the boat every second, and space so cramped they couldn't even sit up straight. They had to eat lying down. Their bodies were at the brink of freezing, their lips cracked from dehydration, and their throats so dry they couldn't even swallow spit. In sheer frustration, Shackleton would shout at the birds flying above. But on May 10, 1916, after 16 days of fighting death, their boat crashed onto the shores of South Georgia Island. They had achieved the impossible. They had crossed Drake's Passage. But fate wasn't done testing them. A fierce storm had forced their boat to land on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station and human civilization lay on the opposite coast. They had 2 choices: sail 130 miles around the island in a battered, wrecked boat, or trek across the 10,000-foot snow-capped mountains of South Georgia on foot. No human in history had ever crossed the mountains of South Georgia on foot. There were no maps, no trails. Shackleton picked 2 men, Worsley and Crean, to come with him. Carrying no tents and no sleeping bags, they hammered brass screws into the soles of their boots for traction, roped themselves together, and at 3 a.m. on May 19, 1916, began their ascent. For 36 continuous hours without a single minute of sleep, sinking knee-deep into snow, they climbed up and down jagged peaks. Time and again, they hit dead ends and had to backtrack. At one point, they found themselves at the edge of a precipice with a sheer drop. Time was running out, and freezing to death was imminent. Shackleton made a crazy decision. They coiled up their rope to make a makeshift sled and slid down a 3,000-foot icy slope into the pitch-black darkness. One wrong move meant plummeting into a crevasse, but miraculously, they survived the slide. On May 20th, 1916, after 36 hours of non-stop trekking, 3 filthy, heavily bearded, weather-beaten men in tattered clothes staggered into Stromness whaling station. The station manager couldn't even recognize them. When Shackleton revealed his identity, tears welled up in the manager's eyes. The whole world believed Shackleton and his crew had perished 2 years ago. But Shackleton's mission was far from over. 22 of his men were still trapped on Elephant Island. Conditions there had turned dire. For 128 long days, every single morning, their leader Frank Wild would wake the men with the exact same words. "Pack your bags, lads. The boss is coming today." But days turned into months. As the sun set each evening, hope faded a little more. One man's leg had to be amputated due to gangrene. After 4 months, belief that Shackleton was still alive vanished, and the men began preparing their remaining boats to make a desperate escape. Meanwhile, Shackleton attempted 3 separate rescue missions on 3 different ships, but heavy sea ice blocked his path every single time. Yet Shackleton refused to give up. He secured a small vessel named Yelcho from the Chilean government, and on August 25, 1916, set sail for Elephant Island a 4th time. On August 30th, 1916, as the stranded men on Elephant Island were packing their gear to leave, a plume of smoke appeared on the horizon. A ship was heading toward them. A small boat lowered into the water. Standing at the bow was their boss, Sir Ernest Shackleton. Shackleton shouted across the water, "Are you all well?" The response echoed back, "We are all safe, boss." It was nothing short of a miracle. After being trapped in the harshest environment on Earth for 2 years, after losing their ship, after surviving freezing seas and 10,000-foot mountains, Shackleton brought all 28 of his men home alive. Not a single life was lost. 106 years after this historical saga, in March 2022, scientists discovered Shackleton's ship, Endurance, resting 10,000 feet beneath the surface of the Weddell Sea. Thanks to the freezing Antarctic waters and the absence of wood-boring parasites, even after a century, Endurance stands in near-perfect condition on the ocean floor, as if it sank just yesterday. The name, Endurance, carved on its stern, still glimmers clearly. Sir Ernest Shackleton never fulfilled his dream of walking across Antarctica, but he authored the greatest survival story in human history. He proved that as long as the human spirit holds onto hope and trust in one another, no force on Earth, not even the icy hell of Antarctica, can break the human soul. What part of Shackleton's unbelievable story inspired you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more deep dive historical breakdowns and scientific mysteries.